So, I have a story that I wanted to tell because my actions were a bit severe. And they probably would have landed me in jail had there not been a camera that caught literally the entire interaction. We'll get to that. But to start, I want to explain who I am. My name is Julian, and I'm not a very large man. I am, to put it lightly, a bit flamboyant. And I've been targeted for this in the past. Mostly just hateful words and such, but at least one other time, I was attacked because of who I am. Unfortunately, that event left me with a bit of PTSD, and because of this, I think I did overreact when this recent situation happened. But at the same time, my actions were deemed legally justified. This happened on a fairly routine Friday for me, at least work-wise. I work at a local tech shop, one that does phone repairs and sells various accessories and such. On this particular Friday, I was a closer, and my roommate was supposed to come pick me up. I ended up closing at normal with my boss, and after we were done, he asked me if I had a ride home. I told him that I did, that my roommate was going to come get me, and he asked if I wanted him to stay until he showed up. I stupidly told him not to worry about it, that my roommate was probably just a few minutes late, and that they'd be there any minute. He went ahead and left, and I was just standing there waiting for a few more minutes before I called my roommate. When he answered, I could tell that he wasn't at home, and he asked me what was up. I asked him where the hell he was, and I could hear it click that he'd forgotten that he was my ride. Come to find out, he was at a party and was about 3 drinks deep. I angrily ended the call and just stood there thinking, great, now I have to walk home. It wasn't a crazy far walk, but it wasn't one that I was wanting to do that late at night. I didn't really have much of a choice, as I didn't have money to pay for an Uber right then, so I just bucked up and started walking home. I started making my way out into the parking lot when I watched a van drive down the road just outside the lot at a super slow speed. They were going at a normal speed, got out front of the shop, and then slowed down and kept on going. I thought it was weird, but just shrugged it off, thinking they were looking for something. Until I saw them hit a U-turn at the next intersection, drive back past the strip mall where our shop was, and then turn into the parking lot. I just stood there like an idiot watching them pull in, and then slowly pull up just past where I was standing. As soon as the car parked about 5 feet to my right, I watched as this scraggly-looking man threw the driver's door open and started walking back towards where I was. As he did, he said, "Hey, are you okay?" I was a bit confused, like, yeah, why wouldn't I be? I told him as such, and he laughed and then said, "What are you doing out here all alone then?" I'm not gonna lie, this was such a weird interaction. This guy got out and just started hitting me with these weird questions, and I was just answering them with short responses like this was totally normal. It was absolutely not normal. And I don't know why it didn't really click at the time that something was up, but it didn't. It clicked really about 30 seconds after his last question, when he reached out and grabbed my wrist and said something like, "Why don't you get in the van? I'll take you home." I still just kind of stood there looking at him like I was offended, and said something like, "No, thank you. I'll walk." He then started mumbling something to himself for a moment before shouting, "I have a gun, and if you don't get in the van, I'm gonna effing kill you." There was obviously no way in hell I was going to get into that van, and I was pretty sure that if I did, he was going to kill me anyways. So I tried to pull away from him, telling him that I was not going with him. This is where the adrenaline kicked in, and things went sideways. As I tried to pull away, he started pulling me harder, and trying to position himself to grab me and push me in the van. My mind then went into overdrive as I realized what was about to happen. I grabbed my keys out of my pocket, putting them between my fingers, and I punched him square in the eye. He pulled back, screaming in agony. I could see the blood on his face, but at this point I really didn't care if I'd hurt him. I ran back to the front of the store, unlocked it, and then relocked it behind me and immediately called the police. I told them that some random guy had just tried to attack me. They asked where he was at that point in time, and I informed them that he was lying on the ground screaming in agony just outside the store. The dispatcher seemed a bit confused by that statement, but I informed him that I had defended myself when he tried to grab me, and that I may have injured him in the process. The cops arrived, as did an ambulance, and they did end up taking him to the hospital as I had apparently done some very real damage. I had to talk to the police for a long time. I ended up calling my manager back in so that he could show them the footage from the front door cameras, and thankfully, right there, caught in 1080p, was proof that this guy had tried to abduct me, and that me hitting him was my attempt to get away. I feel like the officers wanted to chastise me for messing him up like I had, but for me, this was life or death. I was fully aware of what would likely happen if I had let him take me. Thankfully, he went into lockup for whatever they charged him with, and I'm about 99% certain that he lost the use of that eye. But in the end, that was the price he paid for his actions, and I do not regret it. If I'd gotten in that van, willingly or unwillingly, I promise you that I would not be around to write this post. Did I overdo it? Maybe. But I only hit him the one time. And yes, I did use a key and I did hit him in the eye, but I did this to defend myself. And if put in this situation again, I would absolutely do it again in a heartbeat if I had to. I have a bit of an unconventional, scary story that happened on a night shift that I worked a long time ago. I worked night shifts in the emergency room, which is a job that absolutely gives you a different perspective on life. Sometimes you have to deal with the darker side of human nature, and I've seen my share of strange, tragic, and unexplainable events. But there was one night that has stuck with me that was scary in its own way that I cannot shake off. The night started out a bit rough. It was a crazy, stormy night, complete with non-stop thunder and hail actually smacking everything. Despite this, the ER was actually pretty quiet, which is certainly a rare occurrence on a normal night, much less one where conditions aren't favorable. But as anyone that works in a hospital will tell you, you don't look a gift horse in the mouth, and you find appreciation for these rare nights. Around 3 a.m., we received a call that an ambulance was bringing in a woman that they'd found on the side of the road, that she was unconscious and in pretty bad shape when they found her. When they wheeled her in, the sense of urgency hit us all, and I could see that she'd been through something intense. She was drenched, her clothes were torn, and she had multiple visible injuries. Even though she was unconscious, the look on her face was unsettling. She looked like she was in a mix of fear and agony, even though she was out completely cold. We all worked our asses off to stabilize her, to keep her alive and keep her going. As we worked to keep her stable, an officer arrived to give us some extra information. She'd been found by a passing truck driver, no identification, no vehicles nearby. This offered up a few possibilities, namely that she'd been hit and the other person took off. While tending to her, I noticed a few peculiarities about her injuries. They were severe, but they didn't align with the person versus vehicle accident. I've seen a number of those, and the telltale signs of them are typically evident. But this woman had different injuries. I also noted that she had bruises on her wrists and ankles. Bruises that looked more like they came from restraints, not an accident. As we continued to work her over, I noted a number of other injuries that looked like they would have come from a struggle more than a hit and run. Of course, we passed information on our Jane Doe along to the police as we could, but nothing was conclusive. After a while of working and getting her stabilized, she actually started to regain consciousness. Her eyes were wide, and she started freaking out and screaming. Not just a normal, where am I kind of scream. It was a loud and blood-curdling scream that made my blood run cold. She started shouting, asking what was going on, what was happening, and then said something that actually scared the hell out of me. And I'm sure everyone else in the room. "Let me go. They're still out there." Her panic was a bit infectious. The room jumped into overdrive to calm her down, trying to get her to stop thrashing and screaming, but it wasn't working. We tried to talk to her, but she was beyond consolation. We ended up having to administer sedatives to make sure that she didn't hurt herself further, or end up hurting one of us that was trying to calm her down. She slipped back into unconsciousness, and the room let out one hell of a collective sigh. The officer obviously had questions about what she said, and he stuck around with us, waiting for her to wake up again to get more information. I really couldn't shake off this feeling of dread that came with her comments about them still being out there. Who was it she was referring to? The only answer I could think of was that she was being held captive, and that she was running from them. A few hours passed and the shift was coming to an end. By the time I was off, the sun was starting to come out and the storm had thankfully passed. The woman didn't wake up for the rest of my shift, so I didn't get any immediate answers for my questions. I was told by a coworker that she did wake up later that day, but that her memory was terribly fragmented. She could remember running, she remembered hiding, but she didn't know what she was running from. The next thing she remembered was lying on the ground in the rain, thinking that she was about to die, but not knowing why or what had knocked her down. The police speculated that it was a possibility that she'd escaped from a kidnapping, but without more evidence, they couldn't really proceed on that front. She was moved out of emergency and into the step-down care. To the best of my knowledge, nothing ever came of that night, as far as if she was kidnapped or hit by a car during the storm. They never figured out how she ended up on the road, nor where she may have been being held. She wasn't a missing person. After she was identified and interviewed a bit, there was no indication of what had happened, other than that she'd gone to the movies that night by herself, went to a bar for one drink and left, and that's where her memories of that night stop. We never figured out what happened to her, and she never remembered. That's probably the most haunting night I've ever had working there, though I have a number of cases that some could deem as scary. This one, though, I think the mystery of it all really made it that much more terrifying. This happened back whenever I used to work the night shift at a bar and grill type restaurant, which would put it back between 2002 and 2004. I can't remember the exact day and month that it took place, but it was definitely somewhere in there. I'd been working there for a while by this time that this happened, and was definitely situated and understood the job. I'd been there long enough to know the regulars, the people that showed up every day or twice a week or so, and I'd memorized quite a few of the orders as well. To be honest, I hated the job, and I hated having to work until midnight, but it paid the bills, which was what I needed at the time. And thankfully, the rush of people usually came through at the beginning of my shift, and then it was just surviving until I got to go home. I remember that on that night, we were actually quite a bit busier than we normally were. I was running around, taking orders, moving plates, taking people to tables, all the things I was asked to do because we were short-staffed. I had taken the order of a couple of tables and was running over to the station to put them in, when I heard someone let out a scream, which obviously caught my attention. As I looked up, I heard a deafening crash and watched as a car plowed through the front of our restaurant. Glass flew all over the place, and all I could see were guests throwing themselves out of the way as the chaos unfolded. I stood there just watching this play out, as quick as it was. I never expected to be the kind of person that just stood there and watched as something like this happened in front of me, but the whole saying about train wrecks and not being able to look away was apparently true for me. When the dust finally settled, I could see the car. It was a battered old sedan, and it had stopped about halfway in the restaurant. By some miracle, none of the customers were injured. They were all shaken and scared, but none of them looked to be too badly hurt. Our cook, Hank, a bit of a burly man, was the first to jump into action. He started shouting to call 911 and ran over to the car. I was actually the one that grabbed the diner's landline and called it in. The whole time I was trembling and trying to piece together how something like this could have happened. That was actually about the time that I noticed Jenna, one of our waitresses, was actually pinned against one of the booths by the car. I wanted to panic, but I tried to remain calm as I explained to the dispatcher what had happened, and then told Hank that Jenna needed help. Thankfully, she was conscious. She was pretty clearly messed up and in pain, but it was just her leg that was trapped. That's about the time when the driver of the car stepped out. He was an older guy, and I could smell the alcohol on him from where I was standing. He shoved the door open and stumbled out, clearly disoriented, and started shouting with a slur. He yelled out at us, "Sorry about that. I could pay for the door. I just need to get a burger to sober up, because I have to work in the morning." I just stared at this guy with absolute shock. He really did not seem to notice what he had done. He just kept shouting that he wanted a double cheeseburger with mayonnaise, and started getting frustrated when no one was taking his order. Hank and a few of the customers were able to push the car back enough to free Jenna. She was pretty clearly terrified of what had happened, and I think that she realized how close to death she'd actually come that night. She said that her leg really hurt, but for the most part, she looked like she was going to be okay. The whole time they were helping her, the old man that was driving the car just stood there and watched them like they were inconveniencing him, until he decided to just sit at the bar and watch it all play out. Thankfully, the paramedics and the police were quick, and they showed up within a few minutes. Jenna was rushed to the hospital, the medics were treating the patrons that had some minor injuries, and the police were very quick to arrest the old man that was driving, though he was pretty mad about that fact. He kept screaming that he wasn't even drunk, that he hadn't even been drinking, and that he just wanted a cheeseburger. Obviously, the night was over for the restaurant, and the rest of the night was a blur of talking to the cops and explaining what happened, calling the owner, and the slow process of helping to board up the front. They told me that I could go, but part of me felt like I should help clean up after all was said and done. I think I was still in a bit of shock. After a little bit, though, I crashed pretty hard. I think the adrenaline started ebbing away and I was drained. Working in food, for the most part, I feel like we meet and greet people and fully never expect them to have an impact on our lives. But that old man impacted so many people's lives in the most destructive way possible. Jenna ended up lucky to only have a broken leg, but she was alive. We all were, which honestly was a shock to me. That man could have killed multiple people. All it would have taken was a bit more pressure on the gas, being a couple of spots to the left where there were more people seated. It was a bit haunting to think about, and when the store finally reopened, I was still a bit nervous about pretty much everything. Jenna actually came back too, albeit in a much less work-heavy capacity since she was still in a cast and had crutches. Hank was given an honorary award by the owner for jumping into action, and both of those things were nice, but I think we were all still pretty freaked out about everything that had happened. I've only ever had one experience with anything paranormal. And prior to this, I was not what you would call a believer. In fact, I would say I was a skeptic. And I know that people will say something like, how can you be a skeptic with all the evidence or proof? But honestly, I've seen enough people making arguments for obviously fake BS that it's hard not to be skeptical. I find the stories and experiences that you see on TV to be fun, but not much more than that. And I will honestly say that I still am very skeptical of a lot of the experiences you see on those shows. But I'm much less skeptical about the experiences I've read online or heard in podcasts. About 10 years ago, I started working for a company whose name I'm not really supposed to mention. I can describe it and give it a fake name, but there are reasons that I'm not supposed to mention the name of the company, which may be obvious to some. So let's just say that I worked for a company called The Data Factory, or DF for short. DF is a very large data center that services a lot of high-priority organizations. And while I may not be a tech person, I understand that they are the backbone of a lot of commerce and online presences. DF was built in an old factory that had been shut down and was then repurposed. And it's kind of wedged between a town that no one lives in and a large section of woods and cave systems. More or less, we are in the core of middle of nowhere. And we have several direct fiber optic lines to a very large service provider. It's kind of neat the more you think about it. I was hired on as a security guard at DF through a third-party company, and I was brought in on the overnight shift. I've worked this shift for the entire 10 years that I've worked there, and I think I'm the second most senior guard on the team, and the most senior guard on the night shift. It's a pretty straightforward job. Like I said, it's very middle of nowhere, so we don't have a lot to do, but we still have to keep our eyes peeled. The event that this story is about actually happened in my first year, about 2 or 3 months into my working there. It was a pretty normal night, around 2 in the morning, as that's when I went to my first break. I was walking through the main floor of the data center from the guard post to the break room, thinking that I really needed some coffee if I was going to make it through the whole shift. I was about halfway there when I heard what sounded like someone talking. I jumped. I pulled out my flashlight and shined it in the direction of where I thought it was coming from. I called out, asking who was there, and slowly walked toward the back section of the data center. I paused for a moment, listening to see if I could hear anything more to get a better feel for what I was hearing, but there was nothing. I went ahead and called it into one of the other guards, mentioned that I thought I heard talking on the main floor, and asked them to go ahead and do rounds to make sure that it was nothing. They went to do their rounds, and I continued to go to my break. When I got to the break room, I got my coffee and was sitting there just mindlessly staring at the floor and waiting for the 20 minutes to pass, when I heard another sound. This time it wasn't just a voice. It sounded like somebody yelling. My immediate thought was that it was one of the guards and that they had found someone in the building. I jumped up and ran out to where it sounded like the yelling was coming from, but once again was met with nothing. I grabbed the radio and asked for a check-in, asking if someone found someone, and all of them told me that their rounds came up empty. I asked if anyone had yelled at some point or if they'd heard yelling, and once again, nothing. None of them had heard anything, nor had any of them made any noise. I mentioned that I thought I heard someone, and one of the guards laughed, saying that I must have just been losing my mind. I went back to my coffee, finished it off, and then went back to the station, and just told them that it was really weird and that I swear I was hearing things. They told me again that they did the rounds and that there was nothing on the floor, and that they didn't hear anything at all. As if on cue, when my coworker was saying that he hadn't heard anything, he was cut off by what sounded again like somebody yelling. This time it was less just yelling and more a mix of agonized screaming and crying in pain. I watched as he went completely pale and realized that this time he had heard the sound. I told him that that was close to what I was hearing, and he just sort of nodded like, okay, yeah, that's a thing. I asked him if we should go check it out, and while he wanted to say no, he said that we did need to go at least have a look. We headed to the room where we'd heard the sound coming from and both checked the whole floor. There was nothing. We met back up after checking the whole area, and both reported that there wasn't anything there. When we went back to the guard post, we both kind of did what we could to shake it all off, and he made a joke about how if I was going crazy, then so was he, because he definitely heard the sounds too. Then, after a few moments of us calming down, sitting there in silence, I looked up and I swear I saw what looked like an amorphous shadow just standing in the corner of the building, watching us. When I saw it, the hair on my arms stood straight up and I swear my heart started racing, like I was reacting to seeing this thing. I guess I must have went pale too, because my coworker asked if I was about to pass out. I just told him that I saw something and just left it at that. The rest of the night was actually uneventful. Since then, we've had a few nights where we've heard talking on the floors, but nothing anywhere near as crazy as the screaming of that night. It's kind of become a running joke about the voices in the data center, but that first night was genuinely terrifying. I'm the only one that has ever seen the shadow, much to my disappointment, as that would have added a lot of proof to my story. But it is what it is. About 10 years ago, I worked night shift as a nurse assistant at an assisted living facility. The building itself wasn't old. It was built just a couple of years before I had started working there. Even so, several unexplainable things happened there. Occasionally, I saw black shadows in my peripheral vision. In the middle of the night, the elevator would come downstairs and open with no one in it, and door alarms would go off with no one there. The experience that I'm about to share is the strangest thing that's ever happened to me. On night shift, there are 3 employees. One nurse assistant that stays on the memory care side at all times, one that stays on the assisted living side, that was me, and a nurse. The nurse and I were watching TV on the assisted living side around 1 a.m., and all of a sudden this old-fashioned 1910s style music started playing loudly in the distance. I didn't think much of it at first. I thought that someone was blasting their TV or radio, and I was afraid that they were going to wake the other residents up. We were on the first floor next to the front door, and you can look over this area from the second floor balcony. It sounded like the music was coming from somewhere on the second floor, so we walked up the stairs. When I reached the area where I thought it was coming from, the music faded away until I couldn't hear it anymore. I thought the nurse was playing a trick on me, but he genuinely looked terrified. He also looked harder for the source of the music than I did, looking behind pillows and books for a speaker. I didn't look with him because it was clearly coming from a distance. We searched the entire building, but every time we would walk in any direction, the music would fade away. It was loudest where we were sitting when it began. When we'd given up looking for answers, we went back to watching TV, and I tried my best to ignore it. After a few hours, I realized that it had finally stopped. The nurse and I worked together for 2 years after that, but we never spoke of that night again. The experience was so odd, and it's the main reason that I'm able to keep an open mind when hearing some of the more bizarre glitch stories about things that I've never experienced myself. And thank you so much for sharing, if you choose to do so. When I was in uni, I needed to pay my bills, and I got a job at the local Makas to support myself, because all study doesn't pay enough. I've always been a night owl, and I figured the night shifts would be perfect for me. It's either super busy, or really quiet. And the other staff members teased me when it was going to be my first night, and told me that it was going to be fun. All the online order apps kept ordering, Uber Eats, Menulog, DoorDash, and all the others. So I mainly spent time organizing the orders, checking to see if they were legit and handing food over. Then, I was asked to work at the drive-thru. Now, late-night Makas runs are a big thing here. I've done them plenty of times with my mates too, and yeah, we were dickheads to people. The first lot of cars were okay. Just some kids wanting some late-night munchies. The next car pulled up to order, and they used their horn right away. I could tell that they were going to be rude. I asked them for their order, and they called me a variety of names, but I went ahead and took their orders. Better to get them out so they don't bother anybody. I didn't see this part, but I heard them shouting at my coworkers, calling her a C-word and a B-word. It's one thing to say it to me, but another to say it to someone else. They then threw their hot coffee and food bag at her. We closed the window, and we called the police. They weren't done yet, though. They then threw something, and it actually broke one of the windows. Then they sped off before the police got there. Makas has cameras, so we passed along that information and continued with our night. I don't understand why people pull this crap, but they came back. They tried to get in, and they yelled at us through the glass window, banged on the doors, and said that they just wanted to speak with us. We did not let them in. They actually broke another of the windows, and then spray painted the outside. People tend to act feral at Makas, and there have been fights and drug deals in our car park. It's absolutely wild. Truly, the best and the brightest come out, and I hope people can tell I'm being sarcastic when I say that. Anyways, the cops came, they got arrested, and the next day I told people about the shift. The next few couple of nights were pretty uneventful, same old, but the next weekend, they were back. This time they came in during open hours, acting like nothing had ever happened. We served them, and, of course, there was a mistake with their order. So the bogans threw it on the floor, screamed at some 16-year-old at the cash register, and threatened to come back and stab us. Some of the other bogans told them to screw off, and then a fight erupted. I have no idea why people willingly come to mock us at this point. Chairs were thrown, there was blood on the floor, and none of the people minding their own damn business ended up getting hurt. But it doesn't end there. Oh no. This stupid freaking saga continues with one of the idiots coming back after his brother got arrested because we dobbed him in. I think it was about 4, maybe 5 days later, not quite a week. It was after we were able to finally reopen. This smooth-brained moron thought it was somehow our fault that his brother got in trouble for doing what he did. He came in at nighttime when the late-night staff and the morning crew were switching over. Unfortunately, he wasn't as violent as his brother and nothing got smashed up. It was just more of a nuisance. He was herded out, yelling and telling us that he was going to come back, but he didn't do anything. The family does come back every now and then. Most of the time they're okay. I don't understand how people can behave like this and still expect to be treated well. My managers are all so nonchalant about it. So long as they pay and keep coming back, it's fine, I guess. Part of the fun of working in a suburb next to a massive crap hole. If you've seen the series Housos on TV, that's pretty much where I worked back in the day. People there can be so freaking rough. So, that's my story. I don't work at Marcus anymore, but it was mostly a good job. I even got free Marcus pretty regularly, and some of the bosses were alright too. If you ever need more Marcus stories, I got you, Birdman. So, yeah, that's my train wreck of a story. So, that, my friends, was a collection of some terrifying night shift stories. Stories that happened on the night shift. Obviously. Stories that happened after second shift? In the night? While working at night? After working at night? In a situation where working at night is involved? I don't know. Night shift stories. Scary stories of the night shift variety. You get my point. And hopefully, you all enjoyed the stories. If you did, please do hit that thumbs up button, as it does help a lot. And if you're not already subscribed to the channel, please consider doing so, as that helps more. Yeah. You can also leave me a comment letting me know your thoughts, how you're doing, how your week's gone so far. Or if you've ever had a scary situation that happened on a night shift. If you did, you can type it in the comments just to let me read it. Or, if you want it to be narrated, you should go to astheravendreams.com and click the button to submit your story, as that is the best way to get your story on my channel if it's a longer story that you think would do well in a video. There is never any pressure to send your stories in. Just know that I love reading them, and I love making this content for you all. So, yeah. You can also join Patreon or memberships for get early access to content like this, or other things depending on how you sign up and what you sign up for. You can also do a super thanks, which is just a tip to the channel, and that's always a good time. You can also... Nope. That's it. That's all you can do. There's probably more, but I'm not remembering right now, so... That is the end of that. Hopefully you all enjoyed the video, and hopefully you all remember that until next time, you are loved, you are valid, you are important, you're the best you that you can be, do not forget it, and don't let anyone tell you otherwise. And until I see you again, my friends, much love, and sleep well.